I need to tell you about the Sunday that shattered everything I thought I knew about faith, family, and forgiveness. It's been 3 months, and I'm still processing what happened when my employer walked into my childhood church with a check that had too many zeros to ignore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why I'm sitting here at 2 a.m., questioning whether I sold my soul or saved it, you need to know about the church that raised me and the job that supposedly damned me. Grace Baptist Church sits on the corner of Pine and Broadway like it has for the past 100 years, red brick, white steeple, and a sign out front that still uses those plastic letters you have to change by hand. Every Sunday of my childhood, I sat in the fourth pew from the front, left side, between my mother and grandmother. 3 generations of Anderson women, dressed in our Sunday best, singing hymns from memory. My grandmother, Dorothy Anderson, practically built that church with her bare hands. Not literally, of course, but she'd been the head of the Women's Auxiliary for 40 years, organized every fundraiser, every potluck, every missionary drive. When the roof leaked, she was the one who rallied the congregation to fix it. When families needed help, she was first at their door with a casserole and a prayer. A church is only as strong as the women who hold it up, she used to tell me, pinning my Easter dress just so. Remember that, Emma. We serve because we love, and we love because He first loved us. I believed her. God, how I believed her. My mother carried on the tradition, Sunday school teacher, choir director, keeper of the prayer list. She had this gift for remembering everyone's troubles. Mrs. Johnson's arthritis. The Miller boys' deployment. Young Ashley Chen's struggles with algebra. She prayed for them all by name, every night at our dinner table. And then there was me, Emma Grace Anderson, third in line for sainthood, or so everyone assumed. I played piano for the youth group, taught vacation Bible school, went on mission trips to Guatemala and Haiti. I was going to be a teacher, maybe even a missionary. I was going to make my grandmother proud. Funny how life has other plans. I was 23 when my mother got sick. Breast cancer, stage 3. The kind that requires immediate, aggressive, expensive treatment. We had insurance, the basic plan the school district provided. It covered some things. Not enough things. Not the experimental treatment her oncologist recommended. Not the specialist in Houston. Not the months of unpaid leave I had to take to care for her. I remember sitting in the hospital financial office, staring at numbers that might as well have been in another language. How does a first-year teacher's salary stretch to cover $30,000 in out-of-pocket medical expenses? How do you choose between your mother's life and keeping the lights on? The church helped, of course. Fundraiser spaghetti dinners that raised a few hundred here, a few hundred there. Prayer chains that wrapped around the world twice. Casseroles that filled our freezer. But casseroles don't pay for chemotherapy. That's when I met David Nakamura. I was at the hospital, arguing with a billing clerk about a payment plan we both knew I couldn't afford, when this man in an expensive suit overheard. Japanese-American features, silver streaking through his black hair, the kind of presence that makes people stand up straighter. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was gentle despite the authority in it. I couldn't help but overhear. "May I?" My mother had taught me not to take charity from strangers. But desperation has a way of rewriting your rules. David listened to my story with the kind of attention that made me realize how rarely anyone really listens. When I finished, he pulled out a business card. Nakamura Technologies. CEO. "I've been looking for an executive assistant," he said. "Someone detail-oriented, dedicated, trustworthy. The salary is substantial. And the health insurance covers everything. I don't have any experience." "You've been managing your mother's care, your household, and a full-time teaching job for 6 months. That's experience." The number he quoted made me dizzy. More than triple my teaching salary. "What's the catch?" "Because there's always a catch." He smiled, and it was sad. "My daughter died of leukemia 5 years ago. She was 17. Sometimes we get the chance to help someone else fight the battle we lost. That's not a catch. That's a privilege." I started the next Monday. The work wasn't what I expected. David ran a tech company that developed apps and software, nothing salacious or questionable. He needed someone to manage his calendar, coordinate with international clients, handle correspondence. Normal executive assistant things. What wasn't normal was David himself. Brilliant, yes, but also kind in ways that powerful men rarely are. He remembered the names of every janitor in the building. He paid for his employees' kids' college tuitions. He worked 18-hour days but never expected anyone else to match his pace. And he was lonely. You can see it in the way he lingered over our morning briefings, the way he asked about my mother's treatment, the way his voice caught when he mentioned his daughter. Within 6 months, my mother was in remission. The experimental treatment worked. The specialist in Houston declared it a miracle. I had David to thank for all of it, the insurance that covered everything, the salary that let me pay off the early medical debt, the flexibility to take time off for her appointments. Family first, he always said. Everything else can wait. I'm not sure when things began to change between us. Maybe it was the night we stayed late finishing a proposal, and he told me about his daughter, really told me, not just the sanitized version. How she loved to paint. How she wanted to be a doctor. How he'd held her hand when she died, promising he'd make her proud. Maybe it was when my mother was declared cancer-free, and I broke down crying in his office, and he held me while I sobbed 5 years of fear and exhaustion into his Armani suit. Maybe it was when he started asking my opinion on things that had nothing to do with his calendar. Books. Music. Whether he should sell the house that felt too empty. You're the only person who doesn't want something from me, he said once. We were working late again, Chinese takeout containers scattered across his desk. Do you know how rare that is? I wanted plenty from you, I reminded him. You saved my mother's life. No, he said quietly. You saved your mother's life. I just helped with the paperwork. We didn't cross it. Not for a long time. We both knew what was happening, this slow gravitational pull between us. But he was my boss. He was 25 years older than me. He was David. Brilliant, wounded, generous David who donated anonymously to cancer research and read poetry in 3 languages and still wore his wedding ring 5 years after his wife left him because she couldn't handle their daughter's death. I should find another job, I said one day. We were in his office, and I just caught myself staring at his hands as he signed contracts. This is getting complicated. Is it? He looked up at me, and for once, the CEO mask slipped. I'm not. I don't want you to think this is why I hired you. God, Emma, I would never. I know. And I did. David had never been anything but professional. The attraction, the connection, it snuck up on both of us. I could give you a recommendation, he said slowly. Anywhere you wanted to go. Double your salary. Is that what you want? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I want to stop waking up in a house that echoes. I want to share my good days with someone who understands why they matter. I want. He stopped, shook his head. But I'm your boss. I'm older than you. I'm lonely, I finished. So am I. We agreed I would look for another job. We agreed to keep things professional. We agreed to a lot of things that fell apart the night my grandmother died. Dorothy Anderson passed quietly on a Tuesday, which would have pleased her. Never make a fuss, she always said. The funeral was set for Friday, the church packed with everyone whose life she'd touched. David sent flowers. A massive arrangement of white roses that must have cost a fortune. The card simply said, with deepest sympathy for your loss. She raised an extraordinary granddaughter. My Aunt Karen saw them first. My mother's older sister, the one who'd always resented that Grandma loved us more. She read the card, noted the expense, and put 2 and 2 together to get 5. Who's this David? She asked, voice sharp with suspicion. My boss, I said, focused on making sure the programs were straight. Must be some boss, sending flowers like that. I should have heard the warning in her tone. Should have known that grief and jealousy make a poisonous cocktail. But I was burying my grandmother, and I didn't have energy for Karen's dramatics. The funeral was beautiful. Pastor Thompson spoke about faith and service. The choir sang Amazing Grace. I played In the Garden on the piano. My grandmother's favored him, and only cried a little. David came. Of course he came. He sat in the back, in a simple black suit, and when our eyes met across the sanctuary, I felt less alone. That was my mistake. That single moment of connection, witnessed by my aunt's sharp eyes. The rumors started small. Whispers after Sunday service. Looks that lingered too long. Questions about my new lifestyle and how I could afford my mother's treatment. I heard you're working for some rich man, Mrs. Miller said, her tone making it clear what she thought I was really doing. I'm an executive assistant, I said firmly. It's a good job. With benefits. I'm sure it is, dear. Her smile was all teeth. Must be nice, having a boss who's so generous. I ignored it. Focused on my mother's recovery, on work, on anything but the growing whispers. But small-town churches are like echo chambers. Rumors don't fade, they amplify. It came to a head 6 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. Pastor Thompson called me into his office after Sunday service. The deacons were there. 5 men who'd known me since I was in diapers, looking at me like I was a stranger. Emma, Pastor Thompson began, and his voice was heavy with the kind of disappointment that makes you feel 5 years old. We need to talk about your situation. My situation? Your employment. Deacon Williams wouldn't meet my eyes. There have been concerns about the nature of your relationship with your employer. The words hit like physical blows. Sugar baby. Mistress. Whore. They didn't say them outright, but they hung in the air like incense, choking me. I'm an executive assistant, I said, voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I manage schedules and correspondence. That's all. For a single man who pays for your mother's cancer treatment? Aunt Karen had apparently been thorough in her poison. Who sends flowers that cost more than some people's mortgage? Come now, Emma. We weren't born yesterday. He has excellent health insurance. He's a good employer. That's all. But I could see it in their faces. They'd already decided. The girl they'd watched grow up, who'd played piano for their services and taught their children Bible verses, was now something shameful. Something that needed to be addressed. We think, Pastor Thompson said carefully, that it would be best if you took some time away to examine your heart, to consider what example you're setting for the younger women in our congregation. You're kicking me out. The words came out sharper than intended. We're encouraging a period of reflection, Deacon Roberts said. Until you can, reassess your choices. My choice to work, to have health insurance, to take care of my mother. Your choice to put yourself in a compromising position. Pastor Thompson stood, signaling the meeting was over. We'll be praying for you, Emma, that you'll find your way back to a righteous path. I sat in my car in the church parking lot for an hour, too stunned to drive. 30 years of faithful service, of being an Anderson woman, ended because I took a job that paid well. No, that wasn't true, and I knew it. It ended because they looked at me and saw something dirty. Because a young woman working for an older, wealthy man could only mean one thing in their minds. My mother was devastated. There must be a misunderstanding, she kept saying. If we just explain. They don't want explanations, Mom. They want confession and penance for sins I haven't committed. Then we'll go to another church. First Presbyterian is. No. The word came out harder than I meant it to. I'm done apologizing for taking care of you. For taking care of us. She cried then, and I held her, and we both mourned more than just my grandmother. David noticed something was wrong, of course. I'd been distracted, making minor mistakes I never made. Finally, he called me into his office. What's going on, Emma? And don't say nothing. We've worked together too long for that. So I told him. The rumors. The meeting. The choice between my faith community and my job. I tried to keep my voice professional, but tears came anyway. His face went through several transformations. Shock. Anger. Something that looked like pain. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'll write you a recommendation, he said finally. Today? For anywhere you want. I'll make some calls. You can have a new job by Monday. What? This is my fault. He wasn't looking at me. I should have been more careful. Should have realized how it would look. I've put you in an impossible position. David, I'll give you 6 months severance. A glowing reference. Whatever you need to start over. Is that what you want? I echoed his words from months ago. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I want you to have your life back. Your community. Your faith. I want you to stop paying for my selfishness. Your selfishness? You saved my mother's life. And cost you everything else. No. I stood, anger finally breaking through the hurt. They cost me. Their small minds and smaller hearts. You've never been anything but kind to me. Professional. Decent. The fact that I stopped, suddenly realizing what I was about to admit. That you what? His voice was very quiet. That I care about you. As more than a boss. That's not your fault either. That's just human. We kissed for the first time in his office that day. It wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was two lonely people finally admitting that sometimes connection doesn't follow the rules we set for it. This doesn't fix anything, I said when we pulled apart. It actually makes everything worse. I know. He touched my face gently. But I'm tired of pretending I don't wake up looking forward to seeing you. That I don't stay late just to have a few more minutes in your presence. That losing you wouldn't break what's left of my heart. I can't be your executive assistant anymore. No, he agreed. You can't. So what do we do? I don't know. He smiled, and it was sad and hopeful at once. But for the first time in 5 years, I want to find out. I gave my notice the next week. David tried to convince me to take the severance, but I refused. I'd find another job on my own merits, thank you. We agreed to take things slowly, to figure out what we were to each other without the complication of employment between us. The church, of course, saw this as confirmation of their suspicions. Now I wasn't just his employee, I was his girlfriend. The scarlet letter might as well have been tattooed on my forehead. My mother stopped going to services. If they can't see your worth, she said fiercely, then they don't deserve our presence. But I knew it broke her heart. 3 generations of Anderson women ended because I fell in love with the wrong man. Or the right man, at the wrong time, in the wrong way. David and I dated quietly. Dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants. Movies in the next town over. We were happy, in that careful way of people who know happiness can be costly. He made me laugh. I made him remember life could be good. We fit in ways that surprised us both. But Sundays were hard. Sundays, I felt the absence of community like a missing limb. The rhythm of worship, the familiar hymns, the sense of belonging to something larger than myself, I mourned it all. We could find another church, David suggested once. Somewhere they don't know your history. Our history, I corrected. And it's not that simple. That church is in my blood. My grandmother's hands helped build it. My mother's voice is in those walls. You can't just replace that. I'm sorry, he said, and I knew he meant it. I'm so sorry I cost you that. You didn't, I said, believing it a little more each time. They did. With their judgment and their assumptions and their small-minded gossip. You just offered me a job when I needed one. Everything else, that's just life being messy. 3 months. That's how long I was persona non grata at Grace Baptist Church. 3 months of whispered prayers and missed communions and faith practiced in isolation. Then David did something I didn't expect. He showed up for Sunday service. I wasn't there, of course. But my mother was, sitting in her usual pew, chin high despite the cold shoulders. She told me later how the entire congregation turned when he walked in, this obvious outsider in his expensive suit, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but determined to stay. He sat through the hymns. The sermon about the dangers of temptation, subtle, Pastor Thompson. The offering plate passing. And when Pastor Thompson gave the usual call for announcements, David stood. I'd like to make a donation, he said, voice carrying in that way that made board members listen. To the building fund. The church had been trying to raise money for a new education wing for 5 years. Sunday school classes crammed into the basement. Youth group meeting in the old parsonage. They needed $500,000 and had managed maybe $50,000. David wrote a check for the full amount. Right there. Handed it to a stunned Pastor Thompson. There's one condition, he added, and the sanctuary held its breath. I want you to know exactly who this money comes from. David Nakamura, CEO of Nakamura Technologies. Employer of Emma Anderson. The man you've all decided is destroying her virtue. You could have heard a feather fall. I'm not a Christian, he continued. Haven't set foot in a church since my daughter's funeral. But Emma is. Her faith matters to her in ways I'm only beginning to understand. And you took that from her. Because she worked for me. Because you couldn't imagine a relationship between a man and a woman that wasn't tawdry. His voice never rose, but something in it made people shrink in their seats. So here's what you've taught me about Christianity. That gossip matters more than grace. That appearance trumps truth. That the modern-day Pharisees are alive and well, building walls instead of bridges. He looked around the sanctuary, meeting eyes that couldn't hold his gaze. But Emma still believes. Still prays. Still loves this place that cast her out. So I'm donating this money for her. Because she won't let me fight her battles any other way. Build your education wing. Teach your children. And maybe remember that judgment belongs to God, not to building committees and whisper campaigns. He turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and for the record, I'm in love with her. Not because she worked for me. Not because of some sordid arrangement you've all imagined. But because she's the best person I know. And if you can't see that, then maybe the problem isn't with her. He left. The check stayed. And Grace Baptist Church had a choice to make. They cashed the check. Of course they did. $500,000 is a lot of money for a small church. But cashing it meant acknowledging where it came from. Meant facing the reality that they'd driven away one of their own for the crime of being loved by the wrong person. Pastor Thompson called me 2 weeks later. We'd like you to come back, he said, and I could hear the careful diplomacy in his voice. The deacons have reconsidered. We may have been hasty. Hasty, I repeated. That's one word for it. Will you come home, Emma? Your family has been part of this church for generations. That shouldn't end because of a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. As if they'd simply misheard something, instead of constructing an entire narrative about my moral failings. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. But Emma? We're breaking ground on the education wing next month. We'd like you to play piano for the ceremony. Your grandmother would have wanted that. Dirty pool, invoking my grandmother. But effective. So here I am, 3 months later, still wrestling with the decision. Do I go back? Do I forgive the place that was supposed to be sanctuary but became judgment? Do I play piano for the groundbreaking ceremony funded by the man they condemned me for loving? David thinks I should. Not for them, he says. For you. For the parts of your faith that have nothing to do with small-minded deacons and gossiping church ladies. My mother is torn. She wants her church back, but not at the cost of my dignity. Whatever you decide, she says, I'm with you. But what do I decide? How do you forgive an institution? How do you reclaim a faith community that decided you were disposable? How do you sit in those pews knowing that their acceptance came with a price tag? Part of me wants to tell them exactly where they can put their education wing. The angry part. The hurt part. The part that remembers crying in my car while they prayed for my soul. But there's another part, the part my grandmother raised. The part that knows faith is bigger than the failures of the faithful. The part that misses the hymns and the fellowship and the feeling of belonging to something eternal. What would Dorothy Anderson do? David asked me last night. She'd have never been in this position, I said. She followed all the rules. Did she? He pulled me closer on the couch. She married a divorced man in 1962. That was scandalous then. She raised your mother alone after he died. Worked 2 jobs when women weren't supposed to work one. Seems to me she broke plenty of rules. That's different. Is it? Or is it just that enough time has passed that everyone's forgotten the scandal? He had a point. My grandmother's life, sanitized by memory, had its own sharp edges once. The groundbreaking is tomorrow. I have 24 hours to decide if I'll play piano for the ceremony. If I'll walk back into that church with my head high. If I'll let them accept me back on terms purchased by David's generosity. There's no good answer. Going back feels like betraying myself. Staying away feels like letting them win. And either way, I'm the woman whose virtue was bought back with a donation. But maybe that's the point. Maybe faith isn't about being comfortable. Maybe it's about showing up even when it's messy and complicated and painful. Maybe it's about playing piano for people who hurt you, because the music itself is bigger than their smallness. Or maybe I'm just trying to justify wanting my community back. David found me this morning staring at my grandmother's Bible, the one with her notes scribbled in the margins. Tell me about her, he said, settling beside me on the couch. So I did. I told him about how she'd show up at people's houses with her famous angel food cake whenever there was a death in the family. How she'd organized clothing drives every winter, personally washing and mending every donation before it went out. How she'd held Bible study in her living room for 40 years, never missing a Wednesday even when she was going through chemo herself. She sounds formidable, David said. She was. But also. I traced her handwriting in the margin of Romans. She had doubts too. Look at this. Next to the verse about all things working together for good, she'd written, even Harold's death? Even the miscarriage? Even the fire that took the Johnsons home? Lord, help my unbelief. David was quiet, reading her words. My grandmother's doubts, preserved in fading blue ink. She stayed, though, he observed. Despite the questions. She did. But she never had the church turn on her. Never had to choose between her faith and her survival. Are you sure about that? I looked at him, puzzled. You said she was widowed young. In 1973. A single mother with a daughter to raise. You don't think she faced judgment? Gossip? People questioning how she could afford things. I'd never thought about it that way. But he was right. My grandmother had been 35 when my grandfather died, left with a mortgage and a 10-year-old daughter. She'd gone to work at the factory, taken in sewing on the side, done what she had to do. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Miller mentioned once that there were rumors, I said slowly, pieces clicking together, about Grandma and the factory foreman. Said he was too helpful after Grandpa died. And yet she stayed. She stayed. We sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Then David asked the question I'd been avoiding. What are you really afraid of, Emma? Going back or staying away? I've been thinking about his question all day. What am I really afraid of? I'm afraid of walking into that sanctuary and feeling like I don't belong. Of sitting in the pew where 3 generations of Anderson women have sat and knowing that I'm the one who broke the chain. Of playing hymns on the piano and having everyone remember why I left. But I'm also afraid of not going back. Of letting them drive me away permanently. of giving up on something that's been part of my identity since before I could walk. I'm afraid of being the woman who was bought back, the prodigal daughter who only got to return because her boyfriend wrote a check. I'm afraid of every future disagreement ending with someone muttering, "Well, we know why we have to listen to her." But mostly, I'm afraid that going back means admitting they were right about something. Not about David and me, they were catastrophically wrong about that. But about the fact that I had changed. That the Emma who took that job, who fell in love with her boss, who chose survival over submission, wasn't the same Emma who'd taught their children Bible verses. They were right about that. I'm not the same. The question is whether that's a bad thing. My mother called this afternoon. "Have you decided?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." She laughed, but it was sad. "I've been thinking about your grandmother today. About what she'd say. Probably something about not letting the sun go down on your anger." "Actually," Mom said, "I think she'd tell you about 1968. What happened in 1968? The church tried to force out Reverend Madison. You were too young to remember him, but he was the pastor before Pastor Williams, who was before Pastor Thompson. Reverend Madison had the audacity to suggest that maybe the church should be integrated, that maybe God loved black folks as much as white folks." I sat down hard. I never heard about this. "Because your grandmother won. She and 5 other women threatened to leave and take their tithes with them if the deacons forced him out. The deacons blinked first. The church integrated. Reverend Madison stayed another 10 years. Grandma did that? Your grandmother understood that sometimes fighting for what's right means making powerful people uncomfortable. She also understood that you can't change a system from the outside." After we hung up, I sat with this new piece of history. My grandmother, who I'd always seen as the perfect church lady, had been a rebel. She'd threatened the very thing I'd done, leaving. But she'd used it as leverage for change, not escape. Is that what I should do? Go back and fight for change from the inside? Or is that just my ego talking, thinking I could single-handedly reform a culture of gossip and judgment? David made dinner while I spiraled. He's gotten good at reading my moods, knowing when to talk and when to just be present. We ate in companionable silence until he finally said, "What would feel like victory to you? In this situation, what would winning look like?" I had to think about it. I guess, being able to worship without shame. Being welcomed as I am, not as they think I should be. Having my relationship with you respected instead of whispered about. And do you think that's possible there? I don't know. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not ever. But I struggled to articulate what I was feeling. It's my church. My family's church. Why should I be the one to leave? You shouldn't, he said simply. But that doesn't mean you have to go back tomorrow. You could wait. Let them sit with their choice a while longer. Go back on your own terms, not because they summoned you for their ceremony. It was tempting. But I kept thinking about my grandmother's Bible, about her facing down the deacons in 1968, about her staying through doubts and gossip and hardship. "I need to pray about it," I said, and David squeezed my hand. "I'll do the dishes. Take your time." I went in my room and did something I hadn't done in months, really prayed. Not the quick, "help me get through this day" prayers I'd been throwing up like flares, but the deep, wrestling kind of prayer that leaves you wrung out. "God," I said to the ceiling, "I don't know what to do. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm tired of defending myself for things that don't need defending. But I miss it. I miss the hymns and the fellowship and feeling like I belong somewhere. I miss believing that your people are good." I thought about all the Sundays since they'd asked me to leave. How I tried to maintain my faith alone, reading scripture and praying, but how hollow it felt without community. How David had offered to go to other churches with me, but I'd refused because it felt like betrayal. "They hurt me," I continued. "They looked at me and saw something dirty and shameful instead of seeing how hard I was fighting to save my mother. They took gossip as gospel and pushed me out. Part of me wants to tell them exactly where they can shove their piano and their groundbreaking. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the whole truth. But part of me just wants to go home. Part of me wants to play How Great Thou Art and cry through the whole thing and pretend the last 6 months never happened. Part of me wants my church back." I stayed on my knees for a long time, listening for answers that didn't come in words. Instead, I kept seeing faces. Mrs. Johnson, who taught my Sunday school class and always saved me the last chocolate donut. Mr. Peterson, who'd driven my mother to chemo when I couldn't get off work. The youth group kids who'd sent me a card saying they missed me. They weren't all complicit in what happened. Some had probably believed the gossip, yes. But others had just been caught in the crossfire, unsure what to believe or how to respond. Did I want to punish them for the sins of the loudest voices? And then there was this, if I didn't go back? And Karen won. The gossips won. The people who'd rather judge than love won. They got to keep their comfortable, unchallenged faith while I lost mine. When I finally got up, my knees creaking, I didn't have a clear answer. But I had something else, a strange piece about the uncertainty. Maybe that was answer enough. David was reading in bed when I came out. How did it go? I still don't know what to do. That's okay. Is it, though? The ceremony is in 12 hours. They're expecting an answer. He set down his book. Can I tell you something? About after Lily died? Lily, his daughter. He rarely said her name. For months afterward, people kept telling me I had to make decisions. About her room. Her things. Whether to move. Whether to try to save my marriage. Everyone had opinions about what would help me heal. What would honor her memory. What would be best. His voice was steady, but I could see the old pain in his eyes. You know what I learned? Sometimes the decision makes itself when you're ready. And sometimes being in the uncertainty is exactly where you need to be. You don't owe anyone your presence tomorrow, Emma. Not them, not me, not even your grandmother's memory. You owe yourself the space to choose from a place of peace, not pressure. I curled into his side, grateful for this man who understood complicated grief. What if I wake up tomorrow and still don't know? Then you don't go. And that's a valid choice. Not going is not the same as running away. Sometimes it's just not being ready yet. We talked until late about faith and forgiveness, about community and belonging, about the difference between going back and going home. He told me more about losing his faith after Lily died, how he'd raged at a God who would take a 17-year-old girl in such a cruel way. Do you ever think about going back? I asked. To faith? I mean? Sometimes. When I see how much it means to you. When I see the peace it brings you, even in the middle of all this mess. But I don't know if I can believe in a God who... He trailed off. Who lets terrible things happen? Who lets terrible things happen to children? He corrected. I can rationalize adult suffering. We make choices, we face consequences, we live in a broken world. But children? Lily never did anything to deserve what happened to her. My grandmother used to say that rain falls on the just and unjust alike. Did that help her when your grandfather died young? I thought about her notes in the Bible margins. I don't think so. I think she just kept going anyway. Kept believing anyway. Like faith was a muscle she exercised even when it hurt. Could you do that? He asked. Keep believing even when the church hurts you? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. We finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., the question still unanswered. But something had shifted in all that talking. The decision felt less momentous somehow. Less like a verdict on my entire spiritual future and more like just a choice. One of many I'd make about how to navigate faith and community and belonging. I woke at dawn, the way I always do on important days. David was still sleeping, one arm flung over my pillow. I slipped out quietly and made coffee, standing at the kitchen window watching Seattle wake up. The groundbreaking was at 10 a.m. If I was going to go, I'd need to leave by 9:15. That gave me 3 hours to decide. I thought about calling my mother, but I knew what she'd say, that she'd support whatever I chose. I thought about calling Pastor Thompson, but that felt like capitulation. I thought about calling no one and just staying home, but that felt like cowardice. Instead, I did something unexpected. I called Mrs. Johnson. She answered on the third ring, sounding surprised. Emma? Oh, honey, how are you? I'm trying to decide whether to come today. To the groundbreaking. There was a long pause. I see. Were you there? When they decided to ask me to leave. Another pause. No. That was a deacon's meeting. But I heard about it after. Emma, I want you to know not everyone agreed. Not everyone believed what Karen was saying. But no one stood up for me. No, she admitted. We didn't. And I've been convicted about that ever since. Your grandmother would have had our hides for letting gossip drive away one of our own. So why didn't you say anything? I could hear her sigh through the phone. Because I'm 73 years old and tired of fighting battles in that church. Because it was easier to stay quiet than to challenge the leadership. Because I was a coward. Her honesty surprised me. I'm glad you called, she continued. I've been wanting to apologize. What happened to you was wrong. We failed you. I failed you. Your grandmother asked me to look after you and your mother, and I let her down. Mrs. Johnson. Let me finish. If you come today, there will be people glad to see you. But there will also be people who resent your presence, who see it as proof that money talks louder than morals. You need to know that. The check changed the official position, but it didn't change hearts. That kind of change takes time. So what do? I can't tell you that, Honey, but I can tell you this. Your grandmother once told me that the church isn't the building or the leadership or even the congregation. It's wherever two or more are gathered in his name. If you come today, you won't be alone. I'll sit with you. So will the Petersons and the Chins and at least a dozen others who've been sick about what happened. And if I don't come, then we'll miss you. And we'll keep missing you until you're ready. The church hurt you, Emma. No one expects you to pretend otherwise. After we hung up, I sat with her words. The church wasn't the building or the leadership. It was wherever two or more were gathered. I'd been so focused on the institution that I'd forgotten about the individuals. David emerged, hair sticking up at odd angles. How are you feeling? Like I might go, I admitted. Not for them. Not even for the ceremony. But for the people who've been missing me. For Mrs. Johnson and the others who want to do better. And for yourself? Maybe. I don't know. Is it weak to want my community back? I think it's human. The question is whether that community can become what you need it to be. Only one way to find out. He smiled. I'll shower and put on a suit. You don't have to come. Emma, you're considering walking back into a place that hurt you deeply. You think I'm letting you do that alone? They'll talk. If you come with me. Let them talk. I'm done caring what small-minded people think about us. I love you. I'm not hiding that for anyone's comfort. By 9 a.m., I was dressed in my navy blue dress, the one that was conservative enough for church but nice enough to show I wasn't coming crawling back. David wore his charcoal suit, the one that made him look distinguished rather than flashy. We don't have to stay for the whole thing, he reminded me as we got in the car. If it's too much, we leave. Okay. But I knew, even as I agreed, that if I went, I'd stay. Anderson women didn't do things halfway. The drive felt both endless and too short. Every mile closer, my heart beat faster. What if they turned us away at the door? What if no one would sit with us? What if Pastor Thompson used his speech to make pointed comments about prodigals and repentance? Breathe, David said, taking my hand at a red light. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. I'm scared, I admitted. I know. But you're also brave. You wouldn't be doing this if you weren't. The church parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it for a non-Sunday event. News of the groundbreaking and the donor had clearly spread beyond the congregation. I recognized cars from other churches, local officials, even a news van. Last chance to run, David said, only half joking. No. We're here. Let's do this. Walking across that parking lot felt like crossing a battlefield. Every step was a choice to move toward something that had hurt me. But it was also a step toward reclaiming something that had been taken. Mrs. Johnson was standing by the entrance, clearly watching for us. Her face lit up when she saw me. Emma. Oh, honey, you came. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like White Shoulder's perfume and peppermints. And this must be David. Thank you for coming, young man. Ma'am. David shook her hand, and I could see him relax slightly at her warmth. I've saved seats for you. Middle section, on the aisle. Close enough to the piano if. She trailed off. Well, if you decide to play. I hadn't committed to playing. Pastor Thompson had asked, but I'd left it open. Now, walking into the sanctuary, I still didn't know if I could. The church was packed. Conversations stuttered and stopped as we entered, a ripple of recognition passing through the crowd. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on Mrs. Johnson's silver hair as she led us to our seats. But I couldn't help noticing things. Aunt Karen, sitting in the front row like she owned the place, her face pinching when she saw me. The deacons, clustered near the platform, carefully not looking our way. But also, the Petersons, who smiled and waved. The Chins, who scooted over to make more room. Young Ashley Chun, who I'd tutored in math, practically bouncing with excitement to see me. Miss Emma, she whispered loudly. Are you back? Are you going to teach Sunday school again? We'll see. I said, my throat tight. Pastor Thompson was at the podium, shuffling papers. He looked up, saw me, and something complicated crossed his face. Relief? Regret? Calculation? All of the above? David sat beside me, solid and warm and completely out of place in this world of hymns and hard pews. But he was here. For me. That meant everything. The service began with a prayer, thankfulness for provision, requests for wisdom in using it, carefully vague mentions of reconciliation and restoration. Then a hymn. Great is thy faithfulness, one of my favorites. I found myself singing without thinking, muscle memory taking over. Beside me, David followed along in the hymnal, his voice uncertain but present. Mrs. Johnson sang with gusto. as if volume could make up for the tension in the air. Then it was time for the special music. The moment when I would normally be walking to the piano. Instead, one of the youth group kids stumbled through a simplified version of How Great Thou Art. She did fine, but I could feel eyes on me, wondering. Pastor Thompson stood for his remarks. My whole body tensed. Today is a day of celebration, he began. A day of provision. A day of new beginnings. We break ground not just for a building, but for a future. A future where our children have proper classrooms. Where our youth have space to grow. Where our community has room to expand. Standard stuff. Safe stuff. Then, this gift comes to us from an unexpected source. A reminder that God works in mysterious ways. That sometimes blessing comes through relationships we don't understand. That grace can surprise us. I felt David stiffen beside me. Was that a dig? An apology? Both. Mr. Nakamura's generosity has challenged us, Pastor Thompson continued. Challenged us to examine our hearts. To consider how we welcome the stranger. How we treat those who are different from us. How we respond when our assumptions are confronted. Okay, that was definitely something. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement. As we break ground today, let us also break ground in our hearts. Let us build not just classrooms, but compassion. Not just walls, but welcome. Let us remember that the church is not a museum for saints, but a hospital for sinners. All of us. Everyone. He looked directly at me then. Emma, I know I put you on the spot, but would you consider playing for us as we go outside for the groundbreaking? It wouldn't be the same without an Anderson woman at the piano. The sanctuary held its breath. This was it, the moment of choice. Not just whether to play, but whether to step back into my role, my heritage, my place in this complicated family. I looked at David. He squeezed my hand and nodded almost imperceptibly. Your choice. I stood. The walk to the piano felt like miles. I could feel every eye tracking my movement. Some hostile, some hopeful, some just curious. But I made it to the bench, settled my hands on the keys, and began to play. I chose Amazing Grace. Not for them, but for me. For my grandmother who believed grace could cover any sin. For my mother who'd taught me that love was stronger than judgment. For David who'd shown me that grace could come from unexpected places. For myself, trying to find my way back to faith despite everything. My hands shook on the first verse, but by the second, muscle memory took over. This piano had been my friend since childhood. It knew my touch, welcomed me back like an old friend. I played all 5 verses, even the ones we usually skipped, letting the words wash over me. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come, 'tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When I finished, the silence was deafening. Then Mrs. Johnson started clapping. Then the Petersons. Then others, until about half the congregation was applauding. The other half sat in stone-faced silence, but I found I didn't care as much as I'd thought I would. I returned to my seat as Pastor Thompson announced the processional outside. David took my hand again, and I realized I was crying. You okay? He whispered. I don't know. Maybe. Yes. We filed outside with everyone else. The ceremonial shovels were waiting, ribbons attached. Pastor Thompson, the deacons, and to my surprise, David were called forward. Mr. Nakamura, as our benefactor, would you do the honors? David looked at me. I nodded. He took a shovel, positioned it, and broke the first ground. The crowd clapped. Photos were taken. History was made. But the real moment came after. As people milled around the refreshment table, a stream of people approached us. Some, like Mrs. Johnson's friends, with hugs and welcomes. Others with awkward small talk that carefully avoided the elephant in the room. And then Aunt Karen, because of course. Well, she said, looking David up and down like he was something she'd scrape off her shoe. I hope you're satisfied. Buying your way into respectability. Karen, my mother's voice cut in. I hadn't even seen her arrive. That's enough. Is it? Your daughter's living in sin with a man old enough to be her father, and we're all supposed to pretend it's fine because he wrote a check. No, my mother said evenly. We're supposed to treat people with love and respect because that's what Christians do. Something you seem to have forgotten. How dare you? How dare you? My mother stepped closer. How dare you spread poison about my daughter? How dare you take her kindness and twist it into something ugly? How dare you drive her from her church home with your gossip and then stand here acting righteous? A crowd was gathering. This was not the peaceful groundbreaking anyone had planned. Mom, I said quietly. It's okay. No, it's not. She turned to the gathered crowd. You want to know the truth? My daughter took a job that saved my life. She worked for a good man who paid her fairly and treated her with respect. And when that turned into love, real, honest, complicated love, you all acted like she'd committed murder. You should be ashamed. We were concerned about propriety, Deacon Williams started. You were concerned about appearances, my mother shot back. You didn't once ask if I was okay, if Emma was okay. You just judged and gossiped and condemned. And now you want to act like a check makes it all better? No. The check just revealed who you really are. The silence was deafening. Then David stepped forward. May I say something? His voice was calm, professional. The CEO voice. I came here today because Emma wanted to try to reconcile. Because despite how you treated her, she still loves this place and these people. That speaks to her character, not yours. You had a treasure in your midst, a young woman who sacrificed everything for her family, who worked with integrity and grace, who loved deeply and faithfully, and you threw her away because she didn't fit your narrow definitions. Your loss. My gain. He turned to me. We should go. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Wait. I faced the crowd, many of whom I'd known my whole life. I didn't take that job to get rich or to land a sugar daddy or whatever else you all whispered. I took it to save my mother's life. And yes, I fell in love with my boss. Not because he's wealthy, but because he's kind. Because he understands loss and grief and fighting for the people you love. Because he sees me as a whole person, not just a role to fill. If that makes me a sinner in your eyes, so be it. But I know who I am. And I know whose I am. And that's enough. I took David's hand. Now we can go. We made it to the car before I started shaking. David held me while I cried, not sad tears, but cathartic ones. The kind that come when you finally say things that need saying. I'm proud of you, he said into my hair. That was incredible. That was terrifying. That too. My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Johnson. That was your grandmother coming through you, honey. She would be so proud. Church won't be the same without you, but I understand if you need to find somewhere new. Just don't give up on faith because of faithless people. It's been 3 hours since we left the groundbreaking. David ordered Thai food, and we're eating it straight from the containers while I process everything that happened. Do you regret going? He asks. No. I needed to go. Needed to see if there was anything left to salvage. Needed to say what I said. And is there anything to salvage? I think about Mrs. Johnson and the Petersons, the Chins and Ashley's bright smile. Maybe. Not with the institution, not right now. But with some of the people. Maybe that's enough for now. You could start something new, he suggests. Home church with the people who actually care about you. Maybe. Or maybe I need to take a break from organized religion for a while. Figure out what faith means when it's just me and God, without all the politics and judgment. Whatever you decide, I'm here. Even though you don't believe, I believe in you, he says simply. That's enough for now. My phone has been buzzing with texts. Some supportive, some scandalized by my mother's outburst and my own words. The church gossip mill is apparently in overdrive. But for the first time in months, I don't care. What would you do? I asked David, the same question I've been planning to ask the internet. If you were me, what would you do? He considers. I think I'd take time. Heal. Figure out who I am outside of that place. And then, when I was ready, I'd find or create a community that accepts me as I am. But that's easy for me to say. I don't have 3 generations of history there. No, I agree. You don't. But Emma, what happened today doesn't define your faith. Those people don't get to own your relationship with God. That's yours. They can't take it unless you let them. He's right. And maybe that's the real question I should be asking. Not whether to go back to that building, that institution, those people who showed me their true colors. But how to move forward with faith despite them. How to be an Anderson woman on my own terms. So I'm asking you, internet strangers, not just about today, but about tomorrow. How do you rebuild faith after religious trauma? How do you separate God from the people who claim to speak for him? How do you honor your heritage while creating your own path? Because I don't think this story ends with whether or not I played piano at a groundbreaking. I think it begins there. With choosing love over legalism. With refusing to apologize for taking care of my family. With standing up in front of people who judged me and saying, this is who I am. My grandmother wrote in her Bible margins, wrestling with doubt. My mother stood up to her own sister in defense of truth. And today, I played Amazing Grace for people who don't understand it. 3 generations of Anderson women, all finding our own ways to keep faith despite the faithless. The building fund will build their education wing. They'll teach their children Bible stories in those new classrooms. And maybe some of those children will grow up to be more loving than their parents. Maybe some of them will remember the day the church chose money over morals and then had to face the consequences. Or maybe not. Maybe nothing will change. Maybe Aunt Karen and her cohort will keep gossiping, keep judging, keep missing the point of the gospel they claim to follow. But that's not my problem anymore. My problem, my opportunity, is figuring out what comes next. Whether that's finding a new church home, starting a home church, or taking a sabbatical from organized religion altogether. Whether that's marrying David in a courthouse or waiting to see if Grace Baptist ever becomes worthy of its name. Whether that's teaching my future children about faith despite my experiences or because of them. I started this letter angry and hurt and confused. I'm ending it, still a little of all those things, but also hopeful. Because if today taught me anything, it's that I'm stronger than I knew. That love really is stronger than judgment. That grace can show up in unexpected places, like a tech CEO with his own broken heart, or a mother's fierce defense, or the simple act of playing piano despite everything. So tell me, does choosing love over legalism make me the bad guy? Does taking a job that saved my mother's life make me the sinner they painted me as? Does going back to the church that broke my heart make me weak? Or does it make me exactly the kind of complicated, messy, grace-seeking person faith is supposed to be for? I honestly don't know anymore. But maybe that's the most faithful position of all, standing in the uncertainty, holding both hurt and hope, and choosing to show up anyway. Even if showing up means leaving. 24 hours later, and I'm still processing. The responses to what happened at the groundbreaking have been mixed. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing. Some people from church have reached out with support, saying they're proud of me for speaking up. Others have made it clear that I've burned bridges that can never be rebuilt. Aunt Karen, predictably, has been telling anyone who'll listen that I made a scene and disrespected the sanctity of the ceremony. But Mom told me that several people have privately told Karen to stuff it, which is probably the most excitement Grace Baptist has seen in decades. David's been wonderful through all of this. He made me breakfast this morning, pancakes shaped like hearts, which made me laugh and cry at the same time. I know it's cheesy, he said, but I figured you could use some extra love today. Every day, I told him. I need your love every day. Good thing you've got it then. We're planning to look at houses next week. Not because we're rushing into anything, but because his place echoes with grief and mine is too small for the life we're building. We want something new, something that's ours, something without ghosts. Maybe something with a music room, he suggested. So you can play whenever you want, without worrying about who's listening or judging. The thought of having my own piano in my own space, where I can play hymns or jazz or nothing at all, it's almost too beautiful to imagine. But that's the future. Right now, I'm still sitting with the question of what to do about church, about faith, about community. Mrs. Johnson called this morning. I've been thinking, she said without preamble. What if we started something new? Not a rebellion, not a split, just a gathering. Those of us who want to explore faith without the politics. Bible study and potlucks and real conversation about doubt and struggle and grace. At the church? Heavens no. At my house. Neutral ground. Would you come? Would I? The idea of studying scripture with people who've proven they care more about love than law is appealing. But I'm also tired. So tired of fighting for space in places that should welcome me freely. Can I think about it? Of course. But Emma, don't let them steal your faith. It's yours. Your grandmother's legacy lives in you, not in that building. After we hung up, I sat with my grandmother's Bible again. Found another note I'd never noticed before, tucked into Corinthians. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, the verse reads. And in her spidery handwriting, but Lord, must it bear false witness? Must it endure gossip? Must it hope for change that never comes? Even she struggled. Even she questioned. But she stayed. I'm not her, though. I'm Emma Grace Anderson, third-generation church lady turned tech executive's girlfriend turned. What? I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think that's okay. This morning, I did something I haven't done in months. I went for a walk in the park and prayed. Really prayed. Not in a building, not with a congregation, just me and God in the Seattle morning mist. I'm lost, I told him. I don't know where I fit anymore. I don't know how to be faithful when your people have been so faithless. I don't know how to trust again. The answer didn't come in words. It came in the way the sun broke through the clouds. In the old man feeding pigeons who smiled and said, "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" In the mother pushing her laughing child on the swings. In the quiet certainty that holy ground isn't limited to buildings with steeples. When I got home, David was on a conference call, but he'd left a note on my desk. "Whatever you decide about church, about faith, about any of it, I'm with you. Your God is lucky to have you. So am I." I sat down at my laptop and started writing this letter. Not because I have answers, but because I need to work through the questions. And maybe, just maybe, someone else out there needs to know they're not alone in the struggling. Here's what I've realized in the last 24 hours. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's ever been told they don't belong in their faith community. Every woman who's been slut-shamed for circumstances beyond her control. Every couple who doesn't fit the traditional mold. Every believer who's been told their questions are too big or their sins too visible. The church, not just Grace Baptist, but the capital C church, has a problem. We've become so focused on appearance, on rules, on maintaining the status quo, that we've forgotten the radical love at the heart of the gospel. We've forgotten that Jesus ate with tax collectors and prostitutes, that he touched lepers, that he saved his harshest words not for the sinners but for the religious leaders who burdened people with shame. I took a job to save my mother's life. I fell in love with a man who understood grief. I refused to apologize for either. And for that, I was cast out. But you know what? Maybe being cast out is a gift. Maybe it's forcing me to examine what faith really means when it's stripped of tradition and institution. Maybe it's showing me that God is bigger than any building, any denomination, any group of flawed humans trying to gatekeep grace. David asked me last night what I would tell my younger self, the girl who played piano for youth group and never questioned her place in the church hierarchy. I'd tell her that faith is going to get complicated, I said. That people will disappoint her. That she'll disappoint herself. But that God is in the complicated spaces too. Maybe especially there. Would you tell her to take the job? In a heartbeat. I'd tell her that saving her mother is holy work. That love, real, messy, complicated love, is always worth it. That standing up to hypocrisy is its own form of worship. And playing piano at the groundbreaking? I had to think about that one. Yeah, I'd tell her to play. Not for them, but for her. To prove to herself that they can't take music from her. Can't take worship from her. Can't take faith from her unless she lets them. You're pretty wise, you know that? I'm pretty tired, I corrected. But maybe wisdom comes from being worn down to your essential self. From having all the pretense stripped away until only truth remains. And what's your truth? That I believe in God but struggle with his people. That I love the hymns but hate the hypocrisy. That I want community but not at the cost of my integrity. That I'm building a life with you that some people will never understand or accept, and I'm okay with that. That's a lot of truth. It's a start. Since I'm already this deep into the story, I should tell you about the emails. Oh, the emails. Pastor Thompson sent one this morning, 3 paragraphs of carefully worded non-apology. He's sorry for any misunderstanding and hopes we can move forward in Christian unity and looks forward to seeing me at services soon. Not a word about the false accusations, the judgment, the shunning. Just bureaucratic smoothing over. I haven't responded. I'm not sure I will. The deacons sent a formal letter, actual paper, in the actual mail, inviting me to a reconciliation meeting to discuss my concerns and find a path forward that honors all parties. All parties. As if Aunt Karen's gossip deserves equal weight with my truth. That one I did respond to. One line. No thank you. But then there are the other messages. The ones that matter. Ashley Chin sent a handwritten card with a drawing of a piano and the words, "Please come back and teach us again." Mr. Peterson left a voicemail saying he was proud of me for standing up for myself. 3 different young women from the church reached out to say that my story gave them courage to examine their own faith struggles. I always felt like I had to be perfect, one wrote. Like any mistake would prove I wasn't really saved. Seeing you claim your truth even when it's messy, it makes me think maybe God has room for messy people after all. Those messages? Those are the church. Not the building, not the leadership, but the people struggling to figure out what faith means in a complicated world. David's been reading over my shoulder as I write this. You know what strikes me, he said. How much energy they spend on controlling people instead of loving them. Imagine if they'd spent half that effort supporting you and your mother instead of tearing you down. That's not how it works, though. Support doesn't generate gossip. Love doesn't fuel judgment. And some people need their judgment more than they need their compassion. Their loss, he said simply. And maybe that's the bottom line. Their loss. They lost a piano player who poured her heart into every hymn. They lost a Sunday school teacher who actually cared about the kids. They lost 3 generations of Anderson women who would have continued serving faithfully if they'd been met with grace instead of gossip. But I lost things too. I lost my spiritual home. I lost relationships I thought were solid. I lost the innocent faith that assumed the best of people who claimed to follow Christ. The question is, which loss matters more? And can anything be rebuilt from the rubble? So here's what I've decided. Sitting here in my apartment with boxes half-packed for the move, David's coffee cooling on the table beside me, my grandmother's Bible open to Romans. I'm not going back to Grace Baptist Church. Not because I'm bitter, though I am, a little. Not because I'm unforgiving, though forgiveness is a work in progress. But because I've outgrown it. Because the God I believe in is bigger than their building, wider than their worldview, more gracious than their gossip. I'm going to take Mrs. Johnson up on her offer. I'm going to gather with people who want to explore faith honestly, who aren't afraid of questions, who understand that doubt and belief can coexist. We'll meet in living rooms instead of sanctuaries. We'll eat real food instead of stale communion wafers. We'll talk about our actual lives instead of pretending everything's fine. And yes, I'm going to marry David. Not to spite anyone, not to prove anything, but because I love him. Because he sees me, all of me, the church girl and the rebel, the believer and the doubter, and loves what he sees. Because building a life with him feels like its own kind of holy work. We're thinking next spring. Something small. Maybe in the park where I prayed this morning. With just family and the friends who've shown they actually care about us. Mrs. Johnson will play the piano. Mom will cry. And somewhere, I hope, my grandmother will be watching and understanding that love comes in many forms. Faith takes many paths. And sometimes leaving is its own kind of staying true. I'm going to keep playing piano, but for myself. David's right about the music room. I need a space where I can play hymns without wondering who's judging, where I can work through my faith in melody and harmony, where the music is just between me and God. And I'm going to keep writing. Because if this letter has taught me anything, it's that there are others out there who need to know they're not alone, who've been hurt by the church but still hunger for faith, who've been told they don't belong but know in their bones that God is bigger than the gatekeepers. Maybe that's my new ministry. Not teaching Sunday school to kids whose parents will pull them away if they find out I'm living with my boyfriend. Not playing piano for people who question my virtue, but writing, telling the truth, making space for the complicated, the questioning, the cast out. My grandmother served her church for 70 years. My mother for 50. I managed 30 before they decided I was disposable. But maybe my service just looks different now. Maybe it's less about maintaining institutions and more about making room for the marginalized. Less about following rules and more about following love. So to answer my own questions, does choosing love over legalism make me the bad guy? Only to people who value law over grace. Does taking a job that saved my mother's life make me the sinner they painted me as? No. It makes me a daughter who did what she had to do. Does going back to the church that broke my heart make me weak? I thought it might. Instead, it made me strong enough to say goodbye. Does walking away make me faithless? No. It makes me free to find faith in new places, with new people, in new ways. What would you do? I asked. But I realize now that's the wrong question. The right question is, what am I going to do? And the answer is, live, love, believe, question, serve. Just not in the ways I was taught. Not in the places I expected. Not with the people who showed me their worst when I needed their best. But somewhere, somehow, with someone. Because faith, I'm learning, is like water. It finds a way. Even when the containers we've built for it crack and break, it seeps through, finds new channels, carves new paths. You can't kill it with gossip or judgment or shunning. You can only change its course. So here's to new courses. To living room churches and park weddings. To love that doesn't fit the mold and faith that survives the fire. To all of us out here in the wilderness, finding God in unexpected places. To choosing love. Every time. Even when it costs everything. Especially then. What would you do? Maybe you're already doing it. Maybe you're reading this in your own wilderness, wondering if faith can survive outside the walls. Maybe you're the one they whispered about, the one who doesn't fit, the one who had to choose between your truth and their tradition. If you are, know this, you're not alone. God is in the wilderness too, maybe especially there. And sometimes, the most faithful thing you can do is leave. So that's my story. The girl who got kicked out of church for her sinful job, whose boss showed up with $1 million donation, who played piano one last time and then walked away. Not an ending, a beginning. Amen and amen.